A black woman becomes NYPD's new chief, entering incognito to uncover the truth. On day 1, a racist cop kicks her, sneering, "You people." A mysterious, muted video hints at a cover-up. What secrets will she expose in a department steeped in hate? You'll be hooked until the shocking end. As you watch, do not forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell to get notified when we share our next video. Elizabeth Keene, a gracious and well-mannered black woman in her early 40s, had been the chief officer in her previous location before she got the promotion and transfer notice to go to New York City headquarters and take up the highest position in the department. She stood at the edge of Manhattan, the city's heartbeat pulsing around her. Skyscrapers towered overhead, their glass facades reflecting the morning sun, while yellow taxis honked in a chaotic symphony. The air smelled of hot pretzels and ambition, but Elizabeth's mind was elsewhere. She adjusted the collar of her simple navy blazer, her only nod to formality, and smoothed her neatly braided hair. Today, she wasn't Chief Elizabeth Keene. She was just Liz, a woman stepping into a new chapter with quiet resolve. She'd made a deliberate choice to forego her crisp chief's uniform, with its polished badge and starched authority. Instead, she wore a tailored blouse, slacks, and flats, unassuming, like any civilian heading to an office job. Elizabeth wanted to see the New York City Police Department headquarters for what it truly was, not the polished facade it might present to a new boss. She'd heard whispers about the department's struggles with morale, corruption, and, most troublingly, systemic bias. As a black woman who'd climbed the ranks through grit, grace, and an unshakable commitment to justice, she needed to know the truth before she took the helm. The headquarters loomed ahead, a gray stone monolith on Center Street, its flags snapping in the breeze. Elizabeth's heart quickened, not with nerves but with purpose. She'd spent years in a smaller precinct, transforming it into a model of fairness and community trust. Now, New York City was her canvas, and she intended to paint it with dignity. But first, she'd observe. Listen. Learn. She approached the entrance, her leather satchel slung over one shoulder, blending into the morning crowd of officers and civilians. The lobby was a hive of activity, phones ringing, boots scuffing against the marble floor, and voices overlapping in a cacophony of urgency. Elizabeth paused near a directory, pretending to study it while her eyes scanned the room. 2 officers leaned against a counter, laughing over coffee. A woman in a suit argued with a desk sergeant about a lost report. Nothing unusual, yet. "Excuse me, ma'am," a gruff voice interrupted. Elizabeth turned to find a uniformed officer, mid-30s, with a square jaw and a name tag reading, Sergeant Malone. His blue eyes narrowed as he sized her up. Elizabeth offered a warm smile, her voice steady but soft. "I'm just here to see someone. I have an appointment." Malone's lip curled slightly, his gaze lingering on her face, then her clothes. "This ain't a tourist stop. You need to state your business or move along." Her smile didn't waver, though a familiar knot tightened in her chest. She'd faced this tone before, suspicion laced with something uglier. "I'm expected upstairs," she said calmly, reaching for her ID. Before she could pull it from her bag, Malone stepped closer, his bulk crowding her space. "ID, now," he snapped, his hand resting on his belt near his baton. "You don't just waltz into NYPD headquarters looking like you're here for a coffee run." Elizabeth's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. She'd dealt with men like Malone before, officers who saw her skin before her rank, her gender before her authority. She handed him her Driver's license, deliberately withholding her department ID. Let's see how this plays out, she thought. Malone snatched the card, squinting at it. Elizabeth Keene, huh? From out of state? You don't look like you belong here. He tossed the ID back, and it fluttered to the floor. Elizabeth bent to retrieve it, her movements measured, her dignity intact. As she straightened, Malone's boot nudged her shin, hard enough to sting, not hard enough to bruise. The contact wasn't accidental. Pick it up and move, he said, his voice low and menacing. We don't need loiterers clogging up the place. Elizabeth's eyes locked onto his, her expression unreadable but piercing. She saw the flicker of unease in his gaze, the kind that comes when someone realizes they've misjudged their target. But she said nothing, only tucked her ID back into her bag and stepped toward the elevator. Malone called after her. Hey, I said move out, not in. Another officer, younger, with a badge reading Officer Torres, jogged over. What's the problem, Sarge? He asked, glancing at Elizabeth with a mix of curiosity and dismissal. She's got no business here, Malone said, loud enough for nearby heads to turn. Probably some activist trying to sneak in and make trouble. Elizabeth's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice even. I'm expected on the 14th floor. If you'd like to escort me, I'd appreciate it. Torres laughed, a sharp bark. Escort you? Lady, this ain't a hotel. Get lost before we book you for trespassing. The lobby had quieted, a few officers and civilians now watching the exchange. Elizabeth felt the weight of their stares, some curious, others hostile. She could have pulled her department ID, ended this farce in seconds. But she didn't. She wanted to see how far this would go, how deep the rot ran. Malone took another step, his boot deliberately clipping her ankle this time. The pain was sharp, but Elizabeth didn't flinch. She stood tall, her eyes never leaving his. Is that necessary, Sergeant? She asked, her tone calm but edged with steel. You're still here? Malone sneered. I told you to beat it. You people always think you can just walk in anywhere. The words hit like a slap, but Elizabeth's face remained a mask of composure. You people. There it was. The venom she'd suspected, laid bare in a single phrase. She memorized Malone's face, the flush of his cheeks, the arrogance in his stance. She'd need that later. Before she could respond, a woman in a crisp lieutenant's uniform strode over, her heels clicking authoritatively. What's going on here? She demanded, her eyes flicking between Elizabeth and the officers. This lady's causing a scene, Malone said, gesturing at Elizabeth. No ID, no appointment, just wandering in like she owns the place. The lieutenant, whose name tag read Lieutenant Harper, studied Elizabeth. Her expression softened slightly. But her tone was clipped. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to explain yourself or leave. This is a secure facility. Elizabeth nodded, her voice still steady. I understand, Lieutenant. I'm here for a meeting on the 14th floor. I can provide my department ID if needed. Harper's brow furrowed. Department ID? You're NYPD? Malone snorted. Her? No way. She's just. Enough, Sergeant, Harper cut him off, her eyes still on Elizabeth. Show me. Elizabeth reached into her bag, her movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out the slim leather wallet containing her chief's badge. She opened it, revealing the gleaming shield and the words, Chief of Police. The air in the lobby seemed to thicken, the hum of activity stalling as Malone and Torres froze. Harper's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. "Chief Keene," she said, her voice tinged with both respect and embarrassment. "I wasn't informed you'd be arriving today. My apologies." Elizabeth closed the wallet, her smile polite but cool. "No apology needed, Lieutenant. I prefer to arrive quietly. Keeps things honest." Malone's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Torres took a step back, his earlier bravado evaporating. The onlookers in the lobby began to whisper, their eyes darting between Elizabeth and the officers. "Let's head upstairs," Harper said, gesturing toward the elevator. "I'll escort you myself." Elizabeth nodded, but her gaze lingered on Malone for a moment longer. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Sergeant Malone, Officer Torres, we'll speak later." Her words were calm, but they carried the weight of a promise. The elevator ride was silent, Harper fidgeting slightly while Elizabeth stood composed, her mind racing. She'd expected resistance, maybe skepticism, but not this, a blatant display of prejudice within minutes of her arrival. The kick to her ankle still stung, but it was the words, "you people," that burned deeper. She'd seen bias before, fought it in courtrooms and precincts, but to face it here, in the heart of the NYPD, was a gut punch. Harper led her to a conference room on the 14th floor, where a handful of senior officers waited. They stood as she entered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and deference. Elizabeth shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and took her seat at the head of the table. The meeting was a blur of budget reports and crime statistics, but her mind kept drifting to the lobby. To Malone. To the culture she'd just glimpsed. After the meeting, Harper lingered. "Chief, about what happened downstairs. I'm sorry. That's not how we operate." Elizabeth met her gaze, her expression unreadable. "Isn't it? I'd like to think so, Lieutenant, but I saw what I saw. And I heard what I heard." Harper's cheeks flushed, but she nodded. "It'll be addressed, ma'am. I promise." "I'll handle it," Elizabeth said firmly. "But I need to know what I'm dealing with. Arrange for me to meet with Malone and Torres privately." Harper hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Chief." "When?" "Tomorrow," Elizabeth said. "And keep it quiet. No need to broadcast it." That evening, Elizabeth sat in her temporary apartment in Brooklyn, the city's skyline glittering through her window. She sipped chamomile tea, her mind replaying the day. She'd come to New York to lead, to reform, to serve. But the lobby incident had cracked open a truth she couldn't ignore, the department she was now tasked with leading harbored a poison she'd fought her entire career. Racism wasn't just a whisper here, it was a shout. The next morning, Elizabeth returned to headquarters, this time in her full chief's uniform. The sight of her, shoulders squared, badge gleaming, turned heads in the lobby. She felt Malone's eyes on her. Before she saw him, his posture stiffening as she approached the desk where he and Torres stood. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "My office. Now." They followed her to the 14th floor, their silence heavy with dread. Inside her office, Elizabeth closed the door and gestured for them to sit. She remained standing, her hands clasped behind her back. "Sergeant Malone, Officer Torres," she began, her tone measured. "Yesterday, you assumed I was an intruder. You questioned my right to be here. You used force, minimal, but force nonetheless. And you Used words that revealed more than you intended. Malone shifted uncomfortably, his eyes fixed on the floor. Torres cleared his throat, but no words came. I'm not here to lecture, Elizabeth continued. I'm here to understand. Why did you assume I didn't belong? Why the hostility? Speak freely. I need to know what's in your hearts if I'm going to lead this department. Malone's jaw tightened, but he spoke, his voice low. Ma'am, I didn't know who you were. I thought you were some activist, maybe someone looking to cause trouble. We get those types sometimes. Those types? Elizabeth echoed, her eyes piercing. Describe them. Malone hesitated, his face reddening. You know, people who come in, make demands, act like they own the place. People like me, Elizabeth said softly, letting the words hang. Black people. Torres flinched, but Malone pressed on, his voice rising. It's not about that. It's about security, about protocol. You didn't show your badge, you didn't. Stop, Elizabeth cut in, her voice like a whip. You didn't ask for my badge until after you decided I was a threat. You didn't question the white woman arguing at the desk, or the white man in a suit who walked past me. You singled me out. Why? The room was silent, the air thick with tension. Torres finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. It's just, we're used to a certain type of person in charge. And you didn't fit that. Elizabeth's heart sank, not from surprise but from the weight of confirmation. She'd hoped for better. But here it was, the ugly truth, laid bare by two men who didn't even realize how deep their bias ran. She leaned forward, her hands on the desk, her eyes locked on theirs. You think I don't belong because I'm black? Because I'm a woman? You think I'm less, don't you? Say it. Malone's face twisted, a mix of anger and shame. It's not like that. It's just, we've got a way of doing things. And you coming in, no uniform, no announcement, it threw us off. We've had issues with certain groups. Certain groups, Elizabeth repeated, her voice cold. Say it plainly, Sergeant. Black people. Say it. Malone's mouth opened, then closed. Torres looked away, his hands clenched in his lap. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken truths. Elizabeth straightened, her gaze unwavering. I'm your chief now. And I'm going to lead this department. With dignity, with fairness, with justice. But I need to know what I'm up against. So tell me, how deep does this go? How many of you think like this? How many of you see a black woman and assume she's out of place? The officers said nothing, their silence a confession. Elizabeth's heart pounded, not with anger but with a dawning realization. She'd come to New York to lead, but the battle she faced was bigger than she'd imagined. As she stood there, listening to the weight of their unspoken hate, she calculated the challenge ahead, how many more Malones were out there, how many more battles she'd have to fight. To make this department a place where justice wasn't just a word, but a reality. And then, from the hallway, a faint shout broke the silence, a commotion, voices raised, the word "Chief" cutting through the noise. Elizabeth's eyes flicked to the door, her mind racing. What now? Have you ever experienced such thing before? Drop a sad emoji if you've ever experienced anything like that before. Elizabeth Keene stood in her office, the weight of her new role as chief of police pressing against her shoulders, though her posture remained unyielding. The polished wood of her desk gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the tension crackling in the air. Sergeant Malone and Officer Torres sat across from her, their faces a study in discomfort, Malone's jaw tight, his eyes fixed on a spot just past her shoulder, and Torres shifting in his seat, his hands fidgeting like a schoolboy caught in a lie. The faint hum of the city filtered through the window, New York's restless energy a reminder of the stakes. Beyond these walls, Elizabeth's chief's uniform felt like armor today, the starched fabric and gleaming badge a quiet assertion of her authority. But it was her eyes, steady, piercing, yet somehow warm, that held the room. She'd called Malone and Torres here to confront what had happened in the lobby yesterday. When Malone's boot had clipped her ankle and his words, "You people," had cut deeper than any physical blow. She wasn't angry, not in the way they might expect. Anger was too simple, too fleeting. What she felt was a bone-deep need to understand, to peel back the layers of their actions and expose the rot she'd glimpsed in the heart of this department. "Sergeant Malone," she began, her voice calm but resonant, like a teacher addressing a student who'd disappointed her. "I want you to explain what happened yesterday. Step by step. Start with why you approached me in the lobby, why you assumed I didn't belong, and why you felt the need to use force." Malone's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. His face, flushed with a mix of defiance and shame, betrayed his struggle to find words. "Ma'am, Chief, I was just doing my job. The lobby's a secure area. You didn't have a badge visible, and you were lingering. We get people coming in all the time, trying to cause trouble. I had to make a call." Elizabeth tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "A call," she echoed. "You saw a woman standing by the directory, looking at it, not bothering anyone. And your call was to confront her, demand her ID, and kick her when she bent to pick it up. Is that standard procedure, Sergeant?" Malone's eyes darted to Torres, as if seeking an ally, but Torres kept his gaze on his lap. "It wasn't a kick," Malone said, his voice rising slightly. "It was an accident. I was trying to move you along, keep the area clear. You were in the way." Elizabeth leaned forward, her hands resting lightly on the desk. Her braided hair, neatly pulled back, caught the light, and for a moment, she looked almost serene, like a storm gathering strength in silence. "An accident," she repeated, her tone measured. "You nudged my ankle, twice. Hard enough to hurt. Hard enough to send a message. And then there were your words. 'You people.' I'd like you to explain that phrase to me. What did you mean by it?" Malone's face reddened further, his hands clenching into fists on his thighs. "I didn't mean anything by it. It was just a figure of speech. I was frustrated, okay? You weren't cooperating, and I..." "Stop," Elizabeth said, her voice cutting through his like a blade, though it never rose above a conversational tone. "Don't deflect. You said, 'you people,' with a sneer, with intent. I've heard that phrase before, Sergeant, and so have you. It's not just words, it's a judgment. A generalization. I want to know who you people are to you. Be honest." The room fell silent, the only sound the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Torres shifted again, his discomfort palpable, but Malone's eyes finally met hers, a flicker of defiance sparking in them. "I meant people who come in acting like they don't have to follow rules," he said, his voice tight. "People who think they can just walk into a secure facility and do whatever they want." Elizabeth's lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes never wavered. "And yet, you didn't confront the white woman arguing at the desk, or the white man in a suit who brushed past me without a word. You singled me out. A black woman, standing quietly, minding her own business. Why was I the one you assumed didn't belong? Malone's mouth opened, then closed, his defiance faltering. It wasn't about that. Elizabeth leaned back, folding her arms, her gaze unrelenting. You weren't thinking about race, she said softly, almost as if to herself. But you saw a black woman, and your first instinct was suspicion. Your first instinct was to push me, literally and figuratively, out of a space where I have every right to be. More than that, I'm your chief. And yet, you assumed I was, you people. So tell me, Sergeant, who are you people to you? Black people? Women? Both? Torres coughed, breaking the silence, his voice barely audible. Chief, it's not like that. We didn't know who you were. We just made a mistake. Elizabeth's eyes flicked to him, her expression softening but not relenting. I appreciate your attempt to smooth this over, Officer Torres, but I'm not interested in mistakes right now. I'm interested in truth. I'm interested in why a man who's sworn to protect and serve felt it was his right to treat me like a trespasser, to use force against me, to reduce me to, you people. I'm not angry, gentlemen. I'm curious. I need to understand what's in your hearts if I'm going to lead this department. Malone's jaw worked, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Look, Chief, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean to offend you. I was just trying to keep things under control. The lobby was busy, and you were acting suspicious, not showing your badge, not explaining yourself. Elizabeth's brow arched, a subtle movement that carried the weight of her disbelief. Suspicious, she said, letting the word hang in the air. I was standing by a directory, looking at it. I spoke politely. Offered to show my ID, and complied with your demands. What, exactly, was suspicious about that? Malone's hands unclenched, then clenched again, his frustration mounting. You didn't look like you belonged, he blurted, then immediately froze, as if realizing the depth of what he'd said. Elizabeth's heart sank, not from shock but from the confirmation of what she'd feared. She'd spent her career navigating rooms where she was the only black woman, the only one who had to prove her worth. Twice over. But to hear it so plainly, so unapologetically, in the heart of the NYPD, it was a wound she hadn't braced for. Say that again, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Tell me why I didn't look like I belonged. Malone's face was a storm of emotions, anger, shame, fear. I just meant, you weren't in uniform. You didn't look like a cop, let alone a chief. I've been here 10 years, and I've never seen someone like you in charge. Someone like me, Elizabeth repeated, her voice steady but heavy with meaning. A black woman. That's what you mean, isn't it? Torres jumped in, his voice desperate. Chief, he didn't mean it like that. We're just used to a certain type of leadership. It's not about race or anything, it's just what? Elizabeth cut in, her eyes locking onto his. It's just that you've never had to answer to a black woman before? It's just that you've built a culture here where someone like me is automatically an outsider, no matter my rank, no matter my credentials. I've been a chief for years, Officer Torres. I've turned around precincts, reduced crime, built trust in communities that didn't trust us. And yet, in your lobby, I was, you people. I was a threat. Why? The silence was suffocating, the weight of her words pressing down on the room. Malone's eyes dropped to the floor again, his hands now still, as if he'd run out of fight. Torres swallowed hard, his face pale. Elizabeth took a deep breath, her composure a testament to years of navigating moments like this. "I'm not here to shame you," she said, her voice softening but no less firm. "I'm here to lead. But I can't lead a department where officers feel entitled to treat people, any people, the way you treated me. So I'm asking you, Sergeant Malone, to be honest. Why did you generalize? Why, you people? What made you think that was okay?" Malone's head snapped up, a spark of defiance returning. "I wasn't generalizing," he said, his voice tight. "I was talking about you, in that moment. You didn't show your badge, you didn't act like a cop, you didn't." "Enough," Elizabeth said, her voice sharp now, though still controlled. "You're dodging. You didn't say. You said, you people. That's not about me as an individual. That's about a group you've decided I belong to. A group you've judged. I want to know why you felt that way. What's in your head, Sergeant? What's in your heart?" Malone's face twisted, a mix of frustration and something deeper, something raw. "You want the truth?" he said, his voice rising. "Fine. I've seen what happens when we let certain types in here. Activists, protesters, people who don't respect what we do. They come in, they stir things up, they make our jobs harder. I thought you were one of them. That's it." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained steady. "And what made you think I was one of them? My clothes? My demeanor? Or my skin?" Malone's mouth opened, but no words came. He looked away, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Torres, sensing the moment slipping, spoke up again. "Chief, we're sorry. We didn't know who you were. We'd never disrespect you if we knew you were the chief." Elizabeth's gaze shifted to him, her expression unyielding. "That's the problem, Officer Torres. Respect shouldn't depend on a title. It shouldn't depend on a badge. I was a human being in your lobby, and you treated me like less. Why? Because I'm black?" The room fell silent again, the weight of her questions hanging heavy. Elizabeth felt a familiar ache in her chest, not anger, but a deep, quiet sorrow. She'd faced bias before, fought it in courtrooms and precincts, but to confront it here, in her first days as chief, was a reminder of how far she still had to go. She wasn't angry at Malone or Torres, not in the way they might expect. She was disappointed, yes, but more than that, she was determined. Determined to understand, to challenge, to change. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice softening but no less commanding, "I'm going to give you a chance to make this right. Not for me, but for this department. For the people we serve. I want you to think about what you've said, what you've done. I want you to think about why you felt entitled to treat me the way you did. And I want you to come back to me tomorrow with an answer. Not an excuse, a real answer. Can you do that?" Torres nodded quickly, his eyes wide. "Yes, ma'am. I mean, Chief. We'll do that." Malone's nod was slower, his expression still guarded. "Yes, Chief," he said, his voice low. Elizabeth stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Good. Dismissed." As they rose and headed for the door, Malone paused, turning back to her. His face was a mask of conflicting emotions, shame, defiance, something else she couldn't quite place. "Chief, I'm sorry for what happened. It won't happen again." Elizabeth met his gaze, her expression calm but piercing. "I hope not, Sergeant. But apologies don't fix systems. They don't change hearts. I'm counting on you to do better." Malone nodded curtly and left, Torres trailing behind. The door clicked shut, and Elizabeth sank into her chair, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The city buzzed outside her window, oblivious to the battle she'd just begun. She'd come to New York to lead, to reform, to serve. But the encounter in the lobby, and now this conversation, had laid bare a truth she couldn't ignore. The department she led was fractured, its culture tainted by biases that ran deeper than she'd feared. She spent the rest of the day in meetings, reviewing reports, and shaking hands with senior officers who greeted her with cautious respect. But her mind kept returning to Malone's words, "You people. Certain types, you didn't look like you belonged." Each phrase was a thread, weaving a tapestry of prejudice she'd need to unravel if she was to lead this department to something better. That evening, as she walked through Brooklyn to her apartment, the city's energy felt different, less vibrant, more oppressive. The weight of her role, of the challenge ahead, settled into her bones. She stopped at a corner deli, buying a coffee and exchanging a warm smile with the cashier, a young black woman who reminded her of herself at that age. The small interaction grounded her, reminded her why she'd taken this job. For the people. For justice. For dignity. The next morning, Malone and Torres returned to her office, as instructed. Elizabeth sat behind her desk, her expression composed but expectant. She'd spent the night reflecting, praying, preparing for this moment. She needed to know if they'd taken her words to heart, if they'd begun to see the weight of their actions. "Gentlemen," she said, gesturing for them to sit. "I asked you to think about what happened. To give me an answer. I'm listening." Torres spoke first, his voice hesitant but earnest. "Chief, I thought about it, like you said. I realized I didn't question Malone because I trusted his judgment. But I should've. I saw you, and I just went along with it. I'm sorry. I want to do better." Elizabeth nodded, her eyes softening slightly. "Thank you, Officer Torres. That's a start. Sergeant Malone?" Malone leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly, his face a mix of determination and something else, something calculated. "Chief, I've thought about it, and I owe you an apology. I was out of line. But I need to be honest. There's been a lot of tension in the department lately. We've had incidents, protesters, activists, people coming in and causing trouble. Last month, we had a group try to storm the lobby, demanding meetings with the commissioner. They were aggressive. I saw you, and I thought you might be part of something like that. It wasn't about you being black or a woman, it was about the situation." Elizabeth's brow furrowed, her instincts prickling. His words sounded rehearsed, polished, like a story crafted to deflect blame. "A group," she said, her voice calm but probing. "You're saying you mistook me for an activist because of some incident last month?" Malone nodded, his eyes steady but too steady, like a man hiding something. "Yes, ma'am. It was a big deal. We had to call in extra units, and it left a bad taste. I overreacted. I'm sorry." Elizabeth leaned back, her fingers steepled, her mind racing. Something about his story didn't sit right. The details were too vague, the delivery too smooth. She'd reviewed the department's incident reports last night, and there'd been no mention of a lobby storming in the past month. Was Malone lying? And if so, why? She studied his face, searching for the truth behind his words. The room was silent, the weight of her gaze pressing down on him. Outside, the faint sound of sirens wailed, a reminder of the city's relentless pulse. Elizabeth's heart pounded, not with anger but with a dawning realization: Malone was covering something up, spinning a tale to save himself. But what was he hiding? And how deep did this go? If you were Elizabeth Keene, what would you do in such situation? Share your comment with us in the comments section. Be honest in the comments section, someone might find your comment helpful. Sergeant Malone leaned back in his chair, a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead, believing for a fleeting moment that he'd navigated the storm. Elizabeth sat behind her desk, her chief's uniform pristine, the badge on her chest catching the light. Her braided hair was pulled back neatly, framing a face that radiated both grace and authority. She wasn't angry, not in the way Malone had braced for. Instead, her composure was a quiet force, a storm held at bay. She'd listened to his explanation, her fingers steepled, her expression unreadable. But now, as Malone finished speaking, she leaned forward slightly, her voice low and deliberate. "Sergeant Malone," she said, each word measured, "you're telling me you mistook me for an activist because of an incident last month. A group that stormed the lobby, caused a scene, required extra units. That's your justification for how you treated me?" Malone nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, Chief. It was a bad call on my part, but that's what I was thinking. I'm sorry." Elizabeth's lips pressed into a thin line, not in anger but in calculation. She'd spent the previous night poring over incident reports, familiarizing herself with the department's recent history. No mention of a lobby storming had appeared in any log, no record of a disruptive group requiring additional units. Her instincts, honed by years of navigating prejudice and half-truths, screamed that Malone was lying. But she needed proof, not just for herself, but for the department she was now tasked with leading. "I want details," she said, her voice firm but calm. "Every detail about this incident. Names, dates, times. The officers involved, the nature of the group, what they demanded, how it was resolved. I want the full report sent to my office by end of day for verification. Understood?" Malone's face paled, the confidence draining from his eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Yes, Chief," he managed, his voice strained. I'll get that to you." Elizabeth's gaze shifted to Officer Torres, who sat rigid, his eyes fixed on his lap. "Officer Torres, you were in the lobby yesterday. Were you also involved in this alleged incident last month?" Torres swallowed hard, his fingers twitching. I wasn't on duty that day, Chief. I heard about it. Though it was a big deal." Elizabeth's brow arched, a subtle movement that carried the weight of her skepticism. "Heard about it?" she echoed. "From whom?" Torres hesitated, glancing at Malone for a fraction of a second. "Just around. You know, talk in the break room." Elizabeth nodded slowly, her mind cataloging every word, every glance. Torres was nervous, following Malone's lead, but his story was flimsier, less rehearsed. She filed that away for later. "Very well," she said. "I expect those reports on my desk by 5 p.m. Dismissed." The two officers stood, Malone moving stiffly, Torres with a haste that betrayed his unease. As they reached the door, Elizabeth's voice stopped them. "Gentlemen," she said, her tone deceptively soft. This department operates on trust. Malone nodded curtly, avoiding her eyes, and Torres mumbled a quick, "Yes, Chief," before they slipped out. The door clicked shut, leaving Elizabeth alone with the hum of the city outside her window. She exhaled, her shoulders relaxing slightly, but her mind was a whirlwind. Malone's story didn't add up, and Torres's vague corroboration only deepened her suspicion. She wasn't just facing a single officer's prejudice, she was up against a culture that allowed it to fester, a culture that might protect its own with lies. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of meetings. Elizabeth sat through a briefing on crime trends in the Bronx, her pen moving across her notepad as she jotted down statistics, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Malone. His words, "you people, certain types," echoed in her mind, each one a brick in the wall of bias she'd come to dismantle. She'd faced racism before, in her old precinct, in the streets, in the quiet glances of colleagues who doubted her. But this was different. This was her department now, her responsibility. She couldn't let it slide, not when the stakes were so high. In the conference room that afternoon, Elizabeth presided over a meeting with the department's senior leadership, captains, lieutenants, and deputy chiefs, all watching her with a mix of curiosity and caution. The room smelled of coffee and polished wood, the table littered with reports and laptops. She presented her vision for the department: community engagement, transparency, accountability. The words flowed easily, her voice steady, but she felt the weight of every pair of eyes. Some nodded in agreement, others sat stone-faced, their thoughts unreadable. She wondered how many of them shared Malone's views, how many saw her as an outsider despite the badge on her chest. As the meeting adjourned, Lieutenant Harper lingered, her crisp uniform a mirror of Elizabeth's own. "Chief," she said quietly, "about yesterday. I've spoken to the desk sergeant. It won't happen again." Elizabeth met her gaze, her expression warm but firm. "Thank you, Lieutenant. But I need more than assurances. I need to know what I'm dealing with. How deep does this go?" Harper hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing. "It's complicated, Chief. There's history here. Not everyone's like Malone, but there's tension. Always has been." Elizabeth nodded, her mind already turning to the reports she'd demanded from Malone. "I appreciate your candor, Lieutenant. Keep me posted on anything I need to know." As Harper left, Elizabeth returned to her office, the weight of the day settling into her bones. She sat at her desk, the city's skyline stretching out before her, a glittering reminder of the challenge she'd accepted. She'd come to New York to lead, to reform, to serve. But the incident in the lobby, and now Malone's dubious story, had cracked open a truth she couldn't ignore: the department was fractured, its culture tainted by biases that ran deeper than she'd hoped. She glanced at the clock. 4:30 p.m. Malone had 30 minutes to deliver the reports. She opened her laptop, pulling up the department's incident database, searching for any mention of a lobby disturbance. In the past month, nothing. Not a single entry matched Malone's description. Her fingers paused on the keyboard, a knot tightening in her chest. He was lying, she was sure of it. But why? To cover his own prejudice? To protect someone else? Or was there something bigger at play, something she hadn't yet uncovered? Elizabeth leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. She thought of her mother, a schoolteacher, who'd raised her alone in a small Ohio town, instilling in her a fierce belief in dignity and justice. "You don't fight hate with hate," her mother used to say. "You fight it with truth." Elizabeth had carried those words through every challenge, every promotion, every moment when the world tried to reduce her to "you people." Now, they anchored her as she navigated this new battlefield. She opened her eyes, her resolve hardening. She'd give Malone until 5 p.m. If he didn't deliver, she'd dig deeper herself, pull security footage, interview witnesses, cross-reference every report. She wasn't just a chief, she was a detective at heart, and she'd find the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. At 4:55 p.m., her phone buzzed, a text from her sister, checking in from Ohio. "How's the big city treating you?" it read. Elizabeth smiled faintly, typing a quick reply, "It's a challenge, but I'm ready." She set the phone down, her eyes drifting to the door. 5 minutes left. She waited, the silence in her office heavy with anticipation. At 5 p.m., there was no knock, no email, no reports. Elizabeth's heart sank, not from surprise but from the weight of confirmation. Malone wasn't coming. He was stalling, or worse, covering up something he didn't want her to see. She stood, pacing to the window, the city's lights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled over Manhattan. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman who'd fought her way to the top, only to find a new fight waiting. She thought of Malone's face in the meeting, the way his eyes had darted, the rehearsed cadence of his story. He'd thought he'd escaped, thought his lie would hold. But Elizabeth wasn't so easily convinced. She'd demanded the reports to test him, to see how far he'd go to protect his narrative. And now, with the deadline passed and no files on her desk, she knew, this was just the beginning. She sat back down, her fingers hovering over her laptop. She could start digging now, pull the lobbies security footage, call in Harper for a debrief, or even confront Malone directly. But something told her to wait. As the clock ticked past 5:15, Elizabeth's phone buzzed again, this time with an email from the department's records office. She opened it, expecting routine paperwork, but her breath caught at the subject line, "Incident Report, Lobby, March 15th. Her heart raced. March 15th was 2 weeks ago, not last month, and the report wasn't from Malone. Someone else had sent it, anonymously. She clicked the attachment, her eyes scanning the brief summary, a minor disturbance in the lobby. Involving a single protester, not a group. No extra units called, no chaos. Just a young man, quickly escorted out. No mention of activists storming anything. Elizabeth's pulse quickened. Malone's story was unraveling, and someone in the department knew it. But who had sent this? And why now? She leaned back, her mind racing, the city's hum a distant echo. She was alone in her office, the weight of the incident pressing down on her, the absent reports a silent accusation. She waited, her eyes fixed on the door, half expecting Malone to burst in with excuses. But the hallway remained quiet, the files never came, and somewhere in the shadows of the NYPD, a deeper truth was waiting to be uncovered. Wait. Did you see that coming? What do you think Sergeant Malone will do now? Share your thoughts in the comments section. Elizabeth Keene sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop casting sharp shadows across her face. The city outside her 14th-floor office buzzed with the restless energy of New York at dusk, but inside, the silence was heavy, broken only by the soft hum of her computer. The anonymous email from the records office stared back at her, its subject line, "Incident Report, Lobby, March 15th, a quiet accusation." She'd opened the attached video, expecting clarity, but what she found only deepened her unease. The footage, grainy and muted, showed a young man in the headquarters lobby, gesturing animatedly but escorted out within minutes. No group, no chaos, no storming, as Sergeant Malone had claimed. Just a single protester, handled routinely. And the lack of sound, deliberate, unnatural, screamed fabrication. Elizabeth replayed the video, her eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of it. The timestamp confirmed March 15, 2 weeks ago, not the vague last month Malone had referenced. The young man, black, in his early 20s, wore a hoodie and carried a sign, but his movements were non-threatening. His expression more frustrated than aggressive. 2 officers, one she recognized as Malone, approached him, their body language tense but controlled. The escort was swift, professional. Nothing like the dramatic scene Malone had described. But without audio, the context was incomplete. Like a puzzle missing half its pieces. Why was it muted? Who had tampered with it, and why had it been sent to her now? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her mind racing. She'd spent her career unraveling lies, piecing together truths from fragments of evidence. This video wasn't just incomplete. Or a cry for help from within the department. Elizabeth's heart pounded, not with fear but with a fierce determination. She'd come to New York to lead with dignity, to root out the biases that poisoned this department. Malone's lie about a storming was crumbling, and this video was her first real clue to something deeper. She closed her laptop, her resolve hardening. She couldn't confront Malone alone, not yet. She needed the department to see this, to understand the stakes. She needed to show them who she was, not just the gracious, composed black woman who'd walked into their headquarters, but the chief who'd demand accountability, no matter the cost. She picked up her phone and dialed Lieutenant Harper. "I need a conference room booked for 8 a.m. tomorrow," she said, her voice steady but urgent. Senior staff, precinct captains, and Sergeant Malone and Officer Torres. No exceptions. Harper's voice was cautious. "Everything okay, Chief?" "It will be," Elizabeth said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "Just make it happen." She hung up, leaning back in her chair. The city's skyline glittered through her window, a reminder of the millions she served, the communities who needed her to get this right. She thought of her mother's words, etched into her soul: "You don't fight hate with hate. You fight it with truth." The truth was out there, buried in the silence of that video, in Malone's fabricated story, in the culture of a department that had allowed his prejudice to fester. She'd find it, but first, she'd make them face it. The next morning, the conference room on the 12th floor was packed, the air thick with tension and the faint scent of coffee. Senior officers lined the long table, their faces a mix of curiosity, wariness, and fatigue. Precinct captains whispered among themselves, their eyes darting to Elizabeth as she stood at the head of the room, her chief's uniform crisp, her badge gleaming. Malone and Torres sat near the back, Malone's jaw tight, Torres fidgeting with a pen. The muted video from March 15 played on a large screen behind her, looping silently, the young protester's gestures frozen in time. Elizabeth took a deep breath, her hands clasped behind her back. She'd spent the night preparing, replaying the video, cross-referencing reports, and praying for the strength to lead through this moment. She wasn't angry, not in the way they might expect. Her anger was tempered by purpose, by a bone-deep commitment to justice. She'd faced rooms like this before, where her presence alone challenged assumptions, but today was different. Today, she wasn't just a black woman in a position of power, she was their chief, and she'd make them see what that meant. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and commanding, cutting through the low hum of conversation. "Thank you for being here. We have a lot to discuss, but we'll start with something specific. 2 days ago, I entered this building as a civilian, not in uniform, to observe how this department operates. Within minutes, I was confronted, questioned, and physically nudged by Sergeant Malone, who assumed I didn't belong. His words, 'you people,' and his actions revealed a bias that has no place in the NYPD. Yesterday, I asked him to explain himself. He told me a story about a group of activists storming the lobby last month, a story he claimed justified his suspicion of me." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room, meeting every gaze. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, their interest piqued. Malone's face was a mask, but his hands were clenched under the table. "This morning," Elizabeth continued, "I received a video from an anonymous source. It's from March 15th. Not last month, and it shows a single protester in the lobby, not a group. No chaos, no extra units, just a routine escort. But the video is muted, stripped of sound. I want to know why." She gestured to the screen, where the footage looped again, the young man's silent frustration playing out in stark contrast to Malone's tale. Murmurs rippled through the room, heads turning to Malone, who sat rigid, his eyes fixed on the table. "Sergeant Malone," Elizabeth said, her voice firm but not harsh, "stand up." Malone hesitated, then rose, his movements stiff, his face flushed. The room fell silent, every eye on him. Elizabeth stepped closer, her presence commanding without being aggressive. "You told me yesterday that you mistook me for an activist because of a disruptive group last month. You described a major incident, extra units, chaos. But this video," she pointed to the screen, "tells a different story. One protester, handled quietly. And it's muted, which suggests someone didn't want me to hear what was said. I want you to explain this. Right now." Malone's throat worked, his eyes darting to the screen, then back to her. "Chief, I might have gotten the dates mixed up. It was a busy time, a lot of protests. I thought." "No," Elizabeth cut in, her voice sharp but controlled, a blade honed by years of facing half-truths. "You didn't mix up dates. You told a specific story to justify your actions, to cover the fact that you targeted me because of my race. You said, 'you people,' Sergeant. You generalized. You assumed. And now you're lying to me, to this room, to this department. Why?" The room was a vacuum, the air sucked out by the weight of her words. Malone's face reddened further, his hands clenching at his sides. "I'm not lying, Chief," he said, his voice rising. "There was an incident. Okay? Maybe it wasn't that exact day, but we've had trouble with protesters. I thought you were one of them. I was just doing my job." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained steady, laced with a quiet intensity that made the room lean in. "Your job," she said, "is to protect and serve, not to profile and intimidate. You didn't question the white woman arguing at the desk, or the white man in a suit who walked past me. You chose me. You nudged my ankle, twice. You used force, however minor, and you reduced me to, you people. I'm not asking for an apology, Sergeant. I'm asking for the truth. Who muted this video? What are you hiding?" Malone's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering with something, fear, defiance, or both. "I don't know about the video," he said, his voice strained. I didn't touch it. I made a mistake, okay? I'm sorry. Elizabeth stepped closer, her presence towering despite her average height. Her voice dropped, but it carried a fire that burned through the room. A mistake, she repeated. You think this is about a mistake? This is about a culture that lets you think it's okay to treat a black woman like an intruder in her own department. This is about a lie you told to cover your bias, a lie that's falling apart because someone in this department sent me that video. Someone who knows you're not telling the truth. So I'll ask again, what happened in that lobby? What did you say to that protester? And why is the audio gone? The room was frozen, every officer hanging on her words. Torres stared at the floor, his pen forgotten in his hand. Harper's eyes were wide, her lips parted as if she wanted to speak but didn't dare. The senior officers exchanged glances, some uneasy, others intrigued, as if seeing their new chief for the first time. Malone's face was a storm of emotions, anger, shame, desperation. I don't know about the video, he snapped, his voice cracking. I didn't do anything to it. I was just doing my job, keeping the lobby secure. You're blowing this out of proportion, Chief. I said I'm sorry. Elizabeth's eyes blazed, but her voice remained controlled, each word a deliberate strike. You're sorry, she said, but you're still lying. I checked the incident logs. There's no record of a group storming the lobby last month, no extra units, no chaos. You fabricated that story to cover your actions, to justify why you targeted me. And now this video, muted, incomplete, shows up, and you expect me to believe you had nothing to do with it? I'm your chief, Sergeant. I'm giving you a chance to come clean. What happened in that lobby? What are you protecting? Malone's hands trembled, his eyes darting to the door as if he could escape. I'm not protecting anything, he said, but his voice was hollow, the defiance draining away. I told you, I got the dates wrong. I thought you were someone else. That's all. Elizabeth straightened, her gaze unrelenting. That's all, she echoed, her voice low, almost a whisper. But it carried the weight of her authority, her pain, her resolve. You think that's all is enough when you reduced me to a stereotype? She turned to the room, her voice rising, not in anger but in conviction. I came to New York to lead with dignity, to build trust, to make this department a beacon of justice. But I can't do that if officers like Sergeant Malone think they can lie to cover their biases. I can't do that if this department protects those lies. So I'm asking you, all of you, to think about what you stand for. Because I'm not here to play games. I'm here to change things. The room was silent, the weight of her words settling like dust after a storm. Malone stood frozen, his face pale, his eyes locked on hers. For the first time, she saw fear in him, not just of consequences, but of her, of the woman who'd walked into their world and refused to be diminished. Elizabeth turned back to Malone, her voice dropping again, sharp and precise. You have until end of day to provide me with the full, unedited footage from March 15th, and any other incidents you claim. Justify your actions. If you can't, or if I find out you've tampered with evidence, you'll face more than a conversation. Do you understand? Malone nodded, his voice barely audible. Yes, Chief. She gestured to the door. Dismissed. All of you. The officers filed out, their murmurs low, their glances heavy with the weight of what they'd witnessed. Harper lingered, her eyes meeting Elizabeth's with a mix of respect and concern, but Elizabeth gave her A slight nod, a signal to leave. Malone and Torres were the last to go. Malone's shoulders slumped. Torres avoiding her gaze entirely. When the door closed, Elizabeth sank into her chair, the adrenaline draining from her body. The city hummed outside, oblivious to the battle she'd just fought. She closed her eyes, her mother's voice echoing in her mind, "You fight hate with truth." She'd fought for truth today, laid bare the lies that threatened to undermine her leadership. But the muted video, Malone's defiance, the anonymous sender. They were pieces of a larger puzzle, one she hadn't yet solved. She opened her laptop, pulling up the video again, replaying the silent footage. The young protester's face was clear, his eyes fierce but weary, as if he'd expected to be dismissed. She thought of herself in that lobby, standing quietly, only to be met with suspicion and force. Her ankle still ached faintly, a reminder of Malone's nudge, but it was his words, "You people," that lingered, a wound that wouldn't heal. She glanced at the clock. 9:30 a.m. Malone had until 5 p.m. to deliver the unedited footage, but she wasn't holding her breath. The muted video was a deliberate act, and Malone's story was a house of cards, collapsing under scrutiny. Someone in the department had sent her that file, someone who knew the truth, or part of it. She needed to find them, to understand what they were trying to tell her. Elizabeth stood, pacing to the window, the city sprawling before her. She thought of her sister's text from last night, her question about how New York was treating her. She returned to her desk, her fingers brushing the edge of her badge. She'd earned this position through years of grit, grace, and unrelenting commitment to justice. She'd transformed her old precinct, built trust in communities that had none, and she'd do it again here. But first, she needed the truth, about Malone, about the video, about the department she now led. The day passed in a blur of meetings and paperwork, but her mind never strayed far from Malone. She kept her door open, half expecting him to appear with a file or an excuse, but the hallway remained quiet. By 4:45 p.m., her patience was thinning, the silence from Malone a confirmation of his guilt. She checked her email, no new messages. No footage, no reports. Just the same muted video, mocking her with its silence. At 5 p.m., she stood, her heart heavy but her resolve unshaken. She'd given Malone his chance, and he'd failed. Now, she'd take matters into her own hands. Pull security logs, interview witnesses, track down the anonymous sender. She was about to call Harper when her phone buzzed, an internal line. She answered, her voice crisp. "Chief Keene." "Chief," Harper's voice was tense, urgent. "You need to come to the records office. Now." Elizabeth's pulse quickened. "What's going on?" "It's about the video," Harper said. "There's something you need to see." Elizabeth grabbed her jacket, her mind racing. She strode out of her office, the city's hum fading as she focused on the task ahead. The records office was on the 8th floor, a maze of filing cabinets and computer terminals. Harper was waiting, her face pale, a flash drive in her hand. "We found this," she said, handing it to Elizabeth. "It's the unedited footage from March 15th. Audio included." Elizabeth's heart skipped. "Who found it?" "Anonymous," Harper said. "Left on my desk with a note, for the chief." Elizabeth's fingers closed around the drive, her mind already imagining what it might reveal. She returned to her office, her steps quick, her resolve like steel. She plugged the drive into her laptop, the screen flickering to life. The same footage loaded, but this time, sound crackled through her. Speakers, voices, shouts, Malone's voice clear and sharp, saying something that made her blood run cold. She froze, her eyes locked on the screen, as Malone's words from March 15 echoed in her office, a truth she hadn't expected, a side of him she'd only glimpsed. The department thought they knew her, gracious, composed, dignified. But as she stood, her voice rising to call Malone back to her office, they were about to see another side of Chief Elizabeth Keene, one that wouldn't rest until every lie was exposed, every truth laid bare. Elizabeth Keene stood in her office, the unedited footage from March 15 paused on her laptop screen. The crackle of audio still echoing in her ears. The voices from the video, Malone's sharp, venomous tone, the young protesters' desperate pleas, had painted a picture far uglier than she'd imagined. The muted video she'd received anonymously had been a deliberate act, a cover-up to hide what Malone had said that day, words laced with racial slurs, dripping with contempt, words that confirmed the bias she'd glimpsed in the lobby when he'd sneered, "You people," and nudged her ankle with his boot. Now, with the unedited footage in hand, Elizabeth felt the weight of her role as chief settle into her bones, not just a leader, but a reformer, a truth-seeker in a department teetering on the edge of trust. She'd called Sergeant Malone back to her office, her voice on the phone clipped but calm, betraying none of the storm brewing inside her. The city outside her window was alive with the hum of evening traffic, the lights of Manhattan flickering like stars against the dusk. But inside, the air was thick with anticipation, the silence broken only by the soft tick of the clock on her desk. Elizabeth adjusted her chief's uniform, the badge gleaming on her chest, a symbol of the authority she'd earned through years of grit and grace. She wasn't angry, not in the way Malone might expect. Her anger was tempered by purpose, by a deep, unshakable commitment to justice and dignity. The door opened, and Malone stepped in, his face pale, his eyes wary. He stood straighter than he had in the conference room, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his unease. Officer Torres wasn't with him this time. Elizabeth had requested Malone alone, knowing this conversation needed to be direct, unfiltered. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit." Malone obeyed, his movements stiff, his hands resting uneasily on his knees. "Chief," he began, his voice low, "I'm not sure why I'm here again. I told you everything this morning." Elizabeth's eyes locked onto his, steady and piercing, but her voice remained calm, almost gentle. "No. Sergeant, you didn't. You told me a story about a group of activists storming the lobby last month, a story that justified why you targeted me. But I've seen the footage from March 15. The unedited footage. With audio." Malone's face drained of color, his hands clenching into fists. I don't know what you're talking about, Chief. I didn't touch any footage." Elizabeth leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk, her gaze unrelenting. "Don't," she said, her voice firm but not raised. "Don't lie to me again. I heard you on that video, Sergeant. I heard what you said to that young man in the lobby. I heard the slurs, the hatred in your voice. You didn't just escort a protester out, you demeaned him, reduced him to less than human. And then you muted the video to hide it. Why?" Malone's jaw worked, his eyes darting to the floor, the window, anywhere but her. "I didn't mute anything," he said, his voice strained. "I don't know who sent you that video, but it's not what you think." Elizabeth's brow arched, a subtle movement that carried the weight of her disbelief. "Not what I think?" she echoed. I heard you call that young man a racial slur. I heard you tell him to get out before I make you. I heard the contempt in your voice, the same contempt I felt when you nudged my ankle and called me you people. So let's stop the games, Sergeant. Tell me the truth. Why did you do it? Why did you lie? Malone's hands trembled, his face a mix of defiance and shame. He opened his mouth, then closed it, as if the words were stuck in his throat. Elizabeth waited, her silence a demand in itself. She'd learned long ago that silence could be a powerful tool, forcing others to fill it with truth, or more lies. Finally, Malone spoke, his voice low, almost a growl. Fine. You want the truth? I lost my temper that day. That kid came in, waving his sign, talking about police brutality, acting like we're all monsters. I've been on this job 10 years, Chief. I've seen what happens when people don't respect us, when they come in here demanding things, stirring up trouble. I snapped. Okay? I said things I shouldn't have. Elizabeth's heart sank, not from surprise but from the weight of confirmation. She leaned back, her eyes never leaving his. And the video? Why was it muted? Malone's eyes flicked to the laptop, then back to the floor. I asked a guy in records to pull the audio. I knew what I said wasn't right. I didn't want it getting out, causing problems for the department. Elizabeth's voice was quiet, but it cut like a blade. Causing problems for the department, or for you? Malone's face reddened, his hands clenching tighter. For me, okay? I knew it'd look bad. I didn't want to lose my job over one bad day. One bad day, Elizabeth repeated, her tone heavy with meaning. You think this is about one bad day? You targeted me in the lobby, Sergeant. You assumed I didn't belong because I'm a black woman. You used force, however minor, and you reduced me to, you people. And now I find out you used racial slurs against a civilian, then tried to cover it up. This isn't one bad day. This is who you are when you think no one's watching. Malone's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with a mix of anger and desperation. That's not fair, Chief. You don't know me. You don't know what it's like out there, dealing with people who hate us, who make our jobs impossible. That kid in the lobby, he was pushing my buttons, same as you did, acting like you had a right to be there without showing your badge. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained steady, laced with a quiet intensity. Pushing your buttons, she said. Is that what you call it when a black person dares to exist in your space? When they challenge your authority? Tell me, Sergeant, why does it make you so angry? Why do black people like me, like that young man, set you off? Malone's face twisted, his voice rising. Because they, always think you're owed something. The room froze, the air thick with the rawness of his words. Elizabeth's heart pounded, but her face remained a mask of composure. She'd heard this before, in different forms, in different rooms, anger. Born of fear, of resentment, of a worldview that saw her as a threat simply for existing. But hearing it here, from an officer under her command, was a wound that cut deep. People like me, she said softly, letting the words hang. Say it plainly, Sergeant. Black people. That's what you mean, isn't it? Malone's eyes widened, as if realizing he'd gone too far, but the dam had broken. His voice shook, a mix of defiance and confession. Yeah, okay? Black people. I lose my temper when I see you, them, acting like you own the place, like you're better than us. I've seen what happens when we let our guard down. When we let people push us around. I'm not racist, Chief, I'm just. I'm tired. I'm tired of the protests. The accusations, the disrespect. Elizabeth's chest tightened, not from anger but from the weight of his admission. She'd wanted the truth, and here it was, raw, ugly, unfiltered. She thought of her mother, who'd taught her to meet hate with truth, not with hate in return. She thought of the young man in the video, his sign demanding justice, his voice silenced by Malone's slurs. She thought of herself in the lobby, standing quietly, only to be met with suspicion and force. She leaned forward, her voice low but resolute. "You're tired," she said. "You're tired of black people demanding to be treated as equals. You're tired of being held accountable. But let me tell you something, Sergeant. I'm tired too. I'm tired of walking into rooms where I have to prove my worth twice over. I'm tired of officers like you thinking you can reduce me to, you people, because of the color of my skin. I'm tired of lies and cover-ups protecting bias in a department that's supposed to serve everyone." Malone's face crumpled, his defiance giving way to something rawer, shame, perhaps, or the weight of being seen. "I didn't mean it like that," he said, his voice breaking. I lost control. I'm not a bad guy, Chief. I'm not." Elizabeth's eyes softened, but her resolve didn't waver. "I don't think you're a bad guy, Sergeant. I think you're a man who's let his anger and his biases take over. I think you've forgotten what this badge means." She touched the badge on her chest, her fingers lingering on the metal. "This isn't about power. It's about responsibility. To protect, to serve, to treat every person with dignity. You failed that responsibility when you targeted me, when you targeted that young man, when you lied to cover it up." Malone's shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the floor. "What do you want from me, Chief?" I said I'm sorry. I admitted it. What more do you want? Elizabeth stood, her presence commanding the room despite her calm demeanor. "I want you to be better," she said. "Not just for me, not just for this department, but for the people we serve." Malone's head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. "You're firing me?" Elizabeth shook her head, her voice steady but firm. "Not firing. Not yet. I'm stripping you of your sergeant's rank, effective immediately. You'll return to patrol officer status, and you'll be required to attend a rehabilitation program, anger management, bias training, the works. You'll stay there until I'm convinced you can control your temper, until you can prove you understand what it means to serve without prejudice. This isn't punishment, Sergeant. It's a chance to change. But if you can't, or if you lie to me again, you're out." Malone's face was a storm of emotions, shock, anger, shame. "You can't do this," he said, his voice low. Almost a whisper. "I've given 10 years to this department. And I've given 20, Elizabeth said, her voice unwavering. "I've fought for every inch of my place here, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else undermine it with hatred. You have a choice, Malone. Take this chance, or walk away. But you will not stay as you are." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling like a verdict. Malone stared at her, his hands trembling, his eyes searching for something, an escape, a defense, anything. But there was nothing left to say. He'd confessed, not just to the lie, but to the hatred that fueled it. And Elizabeth had met it with truth, with a path forward, not with vengeance. She gestured to the door. "You're dismissed, Officer Malone. Report to HR for the details of your reassignment and the program. I expect your full cooperation. Malone stood, his movements slow, as if the weight of his demotion had physically pressed him down. He paused at the door, turning back to her, his voice barely audible. I didn't mean for this to happen. Chief. I don't know how it got this far. Elizabeth met his gaze, her expression softening but not relenting. I know, she said. That's why I'm giving you a chance to fix it. Don't waste it. He nodded, a single, jerky movement, and left. The door clicked shut, leaving Elizabeth alone with the hum of the city and the echo of her own heartbeat. She sank into her chair, the adrenaline draining from her body, leaving a quiet ache in its wake. She'd done what she had to, held Malone accountable, set a standard for the department, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the first step in a long, hard fight. She thought of her mother, her voice a steady anchor, you fight hate with truth. She'd fought for truth. Today, exposed Malone's lies, his bias, his anger. But the cost was heavy, not just for him, but for her. She'd seen the department's underbelly, the prejudice that festered beneath the surface, and she knew this was only the beginning. Elizabeth opened her laptop, the unedited footage still paused on the screen. She replayed it, the audio cutting through the silence, Malone's slurs, the protesters' pleas, the rawness of a moment that should never have happened. She thought of the anonymous sender, someone in the department who'd risked their own position to get her this truth. Who were they? And what else did they know? She glanced at the clock, 7:45 p.m. The day had been long, but her work wasn't done. She needed to find the sender, to dig deeper into the department's records, to understand how far this culture of bias reached. She picked up her phone, texting Lieutenant Harper, meet me in my office tomorrow, 8 a.m. Bring any records of lobby incidents from the past 6 months. As she set the phone down, her eyes drifted to the window, the city's lights a reminder of the millions she served. She thought of her sister's text from yesterday, her question about how New York was treating her. It's a challenge, she'd said, and now that felt truer than ever. But Elizabeth was no stranger to challenges. She'd faced them her whole life, each one shaping her into the woman she was, a woman who'd lead with dignity, who'd fight for justice, who'd never back down. She stood, smoothing her uniform, her badge catching the light. Malone's confession was a start, but the department was still fractured, its trust in her leadership untested. She'd stripped him of his rank, sent him to rehab, given him a chance to change. But what about the others? How many more Malones were out there, hiding behind badges, cloaking their biases in stories and silence? This is not just another story of a black woman being treated roughly, this is a beautiful story of a strong black woman who used her power to fix a situation that was not just about her but also about the future of blacks who might not be as powerful in the society as she is. It is a story of power and resilience. If this story encouraged you, do not hesitate to share with someone who needs it.